Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Horizon, watching the dead planet grow larger on the main screen, and the silence of space around them felt heavy like a blanket that pressed down on everything and everyone aboard his ship knew. They were far from home in a region called the Void Sector, where no living thing had been found for over 300 years, but Jake had orders to survey every world in this area because humanity always needed to know what lay beyond the next. Star the year was 2387, and humans had been part of something called the Galactic Council for exactly 50 years now, and Jake remembered the stories his grandfather told him about the day the first alien ships appeared over Earth, bringing both wonder and fear to billions of people who suddenly learned they were not alone in the universe, and the aliens called themselves Zephyrians, and they came with an offer that changed everything for humanity forever. The Galactic Council was made up of 12 different alien species, and they had been ruling space for over 10,000 years with just one simple rule that every member had to follow, and that rule was clear and absolute, and it said, no species could ever build or own weapons that could destroy entire star systems, and Jake had learned this rule by heart during his academy training because breaking it meant death or worse for any species foolish enough to try. His chief science officer, Lisa Park, called out from her station that she was detecting something unusual on the planet's surface, and her voice carried excitement mixed with confusion as she reported structures that did not match anything in their databases, and Jake felt his pulse quicken because finding ancient ruins was exactly the kind of discovery that could change a career or start a war depending on what secrets they might hold inside. Commander Alex Carter moved closer to Jake and spoke in a low voice about how the other council species always seemed nervous around humans and how they watched every move humanity made in space like they expected trouble. And Alex had been a military man before joining the exploration service, so he understood the signs of suspicion and fear that other species showed whenever humans pushed too hard or moved too fast into new territory. Jake ordered the ship to enter orbit around the dead world, and Lisa began her deep scans while the rest of the crew prepared landing equipment and weapons just in case. They found something dangerous down there, and the planet looked like it had been lifeless for millions of years, with no atmosphere and no signs that anything had ever lived on its gray and cratered surface. The ruins were massive and clearly built by someone with technology far beyond what the council species possessed, and Lisa reported that the structures were made from materials that should not exist according to known physics, and the energy readings coming from inside the ruins made her instruments go crazy with readings she could not explain or understand. Jake led the landing party down to the surface wearing heavy environmental suits because the planet had no air to breathe and the gravity was too light, making every step feel like floating. And when they reached the ruins, Jake felt his breath catch in his throat because the buildings were beautiful and terrible at the same time, with shapes that hurt to look at directly. Inside the first building they found walls covered with symbols and equations that Lisa said looked like advanced mathematics mixed with physics formulas that described things humanity had never imagined possible, and in the center of the main chamber they discovered something that would change everything for humanity and the galaxy forever. The device looked like a crystal sphere surrounded by metal rings that spun without touching anything, and when Lisa connected her scanner to it, the readings showed weapon designs that could tear holes in space itself and collapse stars and destroy entire solar systems with a single shot. And Jake realized they had found exactly the kind of technology that the Galactic Council forbade any species to possess. Lisa worked frantically to copy the data, while Alex kept watch for any signs of other ships because the Void Sector was supposed to be empty. But Jake had learned never to trust what was supposed to be true, and sure enough, Alex spotted a ship approaching fast from the edge of the system, and the design was definitely Zephyrian, which meant trouble was coming whether they wanted it or not. The Zephyrian ship arrived in orbit just as Jake and his team finished copying the alien data, and Captain Vexhai contacted them demanding to know what humans were doing in forbidden space. and Jake tried to explain they were just conducting surveys, but HFY cut him off with accusations that humanity had been breaking council rules for years. Jake felt anger rising in his chest as HFY demanded they surrender all findings immediately and accused humans of aggressive expansion and unsanctioned research projects, and the alien captain made it clear that humanity was already under suspicion by the council, and this discovery would only make things worse for everyone back on Earth. Standing in the alien ruins with forbidden technology in his ship's computers, Jake faced the biggest decision of his life, and he could either obey the council rules and hand over everything they had found, or he could take the data back to Earth and let humanity decide what to do with knowledge that could change their place in the galaxy forever. Jake looked at Lisa and Alex and saw the same determination in their eyes that burned in his own heart, and he made his choice and ordered the Horizon to jump to hyperspace, immediately taking the alien technology with them and officially breaking humanity's treaty with the Galactic Council and starting something that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. President Maria Santos sat in the emergency meeting room deep beneath the White House, listening to the worst news she had heard since taking office, and the holographic display showed Captain Morrison's ship jumping away from Zephyrian forces, with stolen alien technology that could start a war between humanity and the rest of the galaxy, and she felt the weight of 8 billion lives pressing down on her shoulders as she tried to decide what to do next. The Galactic Council had already sent their message, and it was short and brutal, and gave humanity exactly 72 Earth hours to surrender Captain Morrison and return all the technology he had taken or face immediate expulsion from the Council, followed by military action. That would likely end with Earth burning, and Maria knew the Council had weapons that could crack planets like eggs, so their threat was not empty words but a promise of destruction. Dr. Elena Rodriguez entered the room, carrying a secured briefcase, and her face showed the strain of keeping secrets that had grown too heavy to bear alone. And she placed the case on the table and entered the codes that would reveal information that only 5 people on Earth were supposed to know, and Maria felt her stomach drop as she realized there were more secrets hidden in the shadows of human space exploration. Elena opened the case and pulled out files that contained evidence of research, projects that violated every treaty humanity had signed with the Council, and she explained that for the past 20 years, human scientists had been secretly developing weapons and technology that the Council specifically forbade, and Maria stared at the documents, wondering how many other lies she had been told during her time in office. The truth was worse than Maria had imagined, because the Council's rule about not building system-destroying weapons was not really about preventing war, but about keeping newer species from becoming too powerful. And Elena showed her evidence that the 12 Council species had been using their rules to control galactic development for thousands of years, and any species that showed too much potential was either destroyed or forced into permanent submission. Meanwhile, Jake and his crew had reached Outpost Phoenix, which was supposedly just a research station hidden in the asteroid belt. But when the Horizon docked, Jake discovered it was actually a massive military base filled with ships and weapons that definitely violated Council regulations, and the station commander, Colonel Ben Hayes, greeted them with a grim smile and told them he had been waiting for this day to arrive. Ben led Jake through corridors lined with advanced fighters and cruisers that used technology humanity was not supposed to possess, and he explained that certain people in the Earth government had been preparing for eventual conflict with the Council because they knew the aliens would never allow humanity to reach its full potential, and everything Jake had discovered in the Void sector just moved their timeline forward by a few years. Lisa worked day and night analyzing the data they had stolen from the ancient ruins, and what she found changed everything. They thought they knew about the galaxy and the Council and the mysterious species that had built the ruins, and the weapon designs were just the beginning, because the real discovery was far more important and dangerous than anyone had imagined. The ancient aliens had not just built weapons that could destroy star systems, but had developed technology that could rewrite the basic laws of physics in any area of space they chose, and This meant they could make matter behave differently, or change how energy worked, or even alter time itself within specific regions. And Lisa realized this was not just advanced technology, but something that approached the power of gods. Lisa dug deeper into the ancient records and found something that made her hands shake as she read the translated text, because the aliens who built this technology had not destroyed themselves with it as everyone assumed, but had used it to evolve beyond physical existence entirely, and they had become something more than biological life forms, and had transcended the normal limits that bound all other species to matter and energy. The most shocking discovery came when Lisa cross-referenced the ancient records with Council historical databases and found evidence that the current galactic civilization had been built on the ruins of the transcended species, and the Council had found these ruins long ago and had established their one rule specifically: to prevent any other species from achieving the same evolutionary breakthrough that would threaten their control over the galaxy. Jake stood in the command center of Outpost Phoenix, watching displays that showed Council fleets gathering at the edges of human space, and he knew they were not just facing punishment for breaking a treaty, but were on the verge of a war that would determine whether humanity would be allowed to grow and evolve or would be crushed like so many other species that had dared to challenge the established order. Ben showed Jake the full extent of humanity's secret preparations and the weapons they had built, using modified alien technology and ships that could phase between dimensions and defensive systems that bent space around Earth like a protective shell, and Jake realized that some humans had known this day would come and had been getting ready for years. The Council response came faster than anyone expected, and long-range sensors detected massive fleets moving toward the Sol system from multiple directions, and Maria found herself facing the hardest choice any human leader had ever confronted. Because surrendering meant accepting permanent slavery to alien masters, but fighting meant risking the complete destruction of humanity in a war they might not be able to win. Lisa made one final discovery that changed everything, as she found references to other species that had discovered the transcendence technology throughout galactic history, and every single one had been eliminated by the Council before they could complete their evolution, and she realized that humanity was just the latest in a long line of civilizations that had been murdered for trying to break free from artificial limitations imposed by their alien overlords. Jake received orders from Earth to gather as much evidence as possible about the Council's crimes against previous civilizations, and he knew that revealing the truth to the galaxy might be humanity's only chance to survive, because other younger species might join them if they learned how the Council had been suppressing galactic development for thousands of years. The final decision came when Jake stood before the most advanced communications array in human space and prepared to broadcast everything they had learned to every inhabited world in the galaxy, and he knew that pressing the transmission button would start a war that could not be stopped and would force every species to choose between freedom and the safety of continued submission to their ancient masters. Jake thought about his grandfather's stories of first contact and how humans had welcomed the aliens with hope and trust, and how that trust had been used to chain humanity to a system designed to prevent them from reaching their true potential. And he placed his hand on the transmission control and spoke the words that would change galactic history forever as he told the universe the truth about the Council and their crimes against evolution itself. The transmission spread across the galaxy like wildfire, carrying Jake's voice and the evidence humanity had gathered about the Council's secret history. And within hours, every inhabited world knew the truth about how their civilization had been built on lies and the systematic murder of species that dared to evolve beyond artificial limitations, and the reaction was immediate and explosive as younger races began demanding answers from their ancient rulers on the Council capital world of Nexus Prime. The emergency session convened faster than any in recorded history, and Ambassador Rachel Kim stood before the tribunal of 12 alien species, knowing that her words might be the last any human would ever speak in this chamber. and the energy being called the first speaker loomed above them all, radiating disapproval and barely contained rage at humanity's defiance. The charges against humanity were read aloud, and they included violation of the fundamental law theft of prohibited technology, corruption of galactic order, and incitement of rebellion among member species. And Rachel listened to each accusation, knowing they were all true, but also knowing that truth was more complex than the council wanted to admit. Rachel began her defense by pointing out that humanity had discovered the ancient technology by accident during routine exploration and had only begun to understand its implications after analyzing the data, and she argued that the real crime was not humanity's curiosity, but the council's deliberate suppression of knowledge that could benefit all galactic civilization. The first speaker responded with fury that shook the chamber and declared that some knowledge was too dangerous to be shared, and that younger species lacked the wisdom to use advanced technology responsibly, and Rachel realized she was not really arguing with the council, but with fear itself, because these ancient beings were terrified of losing the control they had maintained for thousands of years. Meanwhile, Jake and his crew launched desperate missions to gather more evidence from other dead worlds scattered throughout the galaxy, and each expedition revealed more proof that the Council had been eliminating promising species for millions of years, and the pattern was always the same, with technological advancement followed by discovery of transcendence principles and then sudden extinction that the Council blamed on natural disasters or civil wars. Lisa worked around the clock translating ancient records and found detailed accounts of at least 7 species that had come close to achieving transcendence before being destroyed. And each civilization had left warnings for whoever might find their ruins, and the message was always the same, that the galaxy was trapped in a cycle of artificial evolution designed to keep newer species from threatening the established order. The most damning evidence came from infiltrating Zephyrian databases, where Lisa discovered files showing that the Zephyrians themselves had once possessed transcendence technology, but had been forced to abandon their research when they joined the Council, and for the past 1,000 years they had served as enforcers, destroying other species' attempts at advancement while secretly resenting their own stunted development. Jake's broadcast had reached the younger Council species, and their reactions varied from shock to outrage to demands for immediate explanations. And the Altarians were the first to officially protest the Council's actions, followed by the Nova Collective and the Helix Confederacy. And soon half the galaxy was in chaos as member species questioned everything they had been taught about galactic law and order on Earth. President Santos faced her own crisis as human colonies split between those who wanted to surrender immediately to avoid annihilation and those who demanded they fight for their right to evolve and develop without alien interference. And the decision became even more urgent when long-range sensors detected the largest Council armada in history approaching the Sol system. Colonel Hayes revealed the true extent of humanity's preparations at hidden bases throughout human space and showed Santos ships that could phase through normal matter using modified transcendence principles and weapons that manipulated gravity itself and defensive systems that could bend space-time around entire planets. But he also warned that using this technology extensively could tear holes in reality itself. Lisa made another breakthrough when she realized that the transcendence process was not just about advanced technology, but required a fundamental change in how an entire species thought about existence and consciousness. And the ancient aliens had not just built better machines, but had learned to exist as pure thought capable of manipulating matter and energy through will alone. The first direct confrontation came when Jake took command of the UES Liberation, which was humanity's most advanced ship built with integrated transcendence technology, and his mission was to delay the approaching Council fleet while scientists completed their research. And the Liberation's capabilities were beyond anything previously seen in the galaxy. Jake's ship could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously and strike targets across vast distances without traveling through normal space. And when the first Council scouts entered, The outer solar system, they found themselves facing a vessel that seemed to ignore the basic laws of physics and could appear and disappear at will while firing weapons that warped space around their targets. The Council response was swift and revealed that they had been hiding their own advanced weapons for thousands of years, and they deployed devices that could collapse hyperspace lanes and create artificial black holes and manipulate time flow around enemy ships. And Jake realized that the ancient species had far more power than they had ever revealed to their younger members. As news of the battle spread across human space, more colonies began choosing sides, and some declared independence from Earth, while others pledged total support for the war effort, and the unity that had held humanity together since first contact began to fracture under the pressure of decisions that would determine their species' survival. Rachel's final argument before the Council was a direct challenge to their authority, and she accused them of crimes against evolution itself and demanded they explain why they had the right to prevent other species from reaching their full potential. And the first speaker's response was a declaration that some prices were too high to pay, and that unlimited development would destroy the galaxy. The session ended with Rachel being expelled from the chamber and the Council issuing an ultimatum that gave humanity 12 hours to surrender unconditionally or face complete annihilation. And as she left Nexus Prime, Rachel knew she was probably the last human who would ever set foot on the Council capital. Jake received word of the Council's ultimatum while engaged in hit-and-run attacks against their forward elements, and he knew that humanity had crossed a line from which there could be no return, and the war that was coming would determine not just their species' fate, but the future of evolution itself in a galaxy that had been stagnant for too long. The Liberation's final transmission before jumping to hyperspace carried Jake's voice to every human ship and colony, and he told them that they were fighting not just for survival, but for the right to become whatever they chose to become, and that no alien species had the authority to place permanent limitations on human potential regardless of the cost or consequences of that choice. The galaxy split into two factions within days of Jake's final transmission, and the war that followed would reshape the fundamental nature of galactic civilization as species chose between the safety of continued submission and the dangerous freedom of unlimited evolution, and humanity found itself leading an alliance of younger races who had grown tired of ancient masters telling them what they could and could not become. President Santos established a war council that included representatives from the Altarian Republic, the Nova Collective, and the Helix Confederacy, and each species brought their own advanced technologies and tactical expertise to the alliance, with General Kethmore contributing Altarian shield technology that could absorb energy weapons, and Admiral Zara Singh providing Nova quantum mechanics that allowed ships to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. Jake led increasingly bold strikes against Council infrastructure using the Liberation's transcendence technology to attack targets that had been considered completely safe for thousands of years, and his greatest victory came when the ship single-handedly destroyed the massive Kepler shipyard that had been building Council dreadnoughts for over a century, and the destruction sent shockwaves through the ancient species who had never faced such devastating attacks. However, the war took an unexpected toll on reality itself, as each use of transcendence technology created small rifts in space-time that spread like cracks in glass, and Lisa's calculations showed that excessive use of the ancient weapons could eventually unravel the fabric of the universe and leave nothing but chaos where ordered space had once existed. The Council's response was merciless and immediate as they deployed planet-killer weapons against human colonies and turned 3 worlds into radioactive wastelands within the first week of open warfare, and President Santos faced the agonizing choice of either surrendering to save civilian lives or authorizing humanity's most dangerous weapons to strike back with equal force. The decision came when Council forces threatened Earth directly, and Santos authorized the deployment of humanity's reality bomb, which had been built using principles stolen from the ancient ruins, and the weapon was designed to erase entire star systems from existence by severing their connection to the fundamental forces that held matter together. The reality bomb's first test took place in an uninhabited system near the galactic rim, and the results were both spectacular and terrifying, as the target star simply ceased to exist along with all its planets and moons, and the space where they had been became a void that hurt to look at directly and seemed to pull at the minds of anyone who observed it too closely. The effects rippled outward from the test site, causing nearby stars to flicker and planets to phase in and out of existence as the fundamental structure of local space-time became unstable, and both sides realized they were approaching a threshold beyond which victory might be meaningless if it destroyed the galaxy itself. Lisa worked frantically to understand the transcendence process before the war consumed everything, and her breakthrough came when she discovered that the ancient species who achieved transcendence had not abandoned the physical universe, but had become part of its underlying structure and existed as the consciousness that maintained the laws of physics themselves. This revelation changed everything about the war's stakes, because it meant that transcendence was not about escaping reality, but about taking responsibility for maintaining it and the ancient species who had achieved this state were still present in the galaxy, hidden within the quantum foam that underlay all matter and energy. Jake's missions became more dangerous as Council forces adapted to humanity's tactics and developed countermeasures for transcendence. Technology and the liberation barely escaped destruction when Zephyrian ships surrounded it using gravity nets that trapped the vessel between dimensions and nearly tore it apart. Before Jake found a way to phase through the trap, the war expanded beyond military conflict as younger species began experimenting with their own versions of transcendence technology, and several civilizations achieved partial breakthroughs that allowed them to manipulate local physics in limited ways. And the Council found itself fighting not just humanity, but an entire generation of species that refused to accept artificial limitations on their development. Colonel Hayes coordinated the construction of massive defense platforms around Earth using transcendence principles to create shields that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously and could absorb attacks from any direction. But the strain of maintaining these defenses required constant power from reactors that were slowly destabilizing local space around the solar system. The Council deployed their most ancient weapons, including devices that could manipulate time flow around enemy targets and trap entire fleets in temporal loops where they experienced the same moment of destruction, over and over without being able to escape. And Jake lost several ships to these weapons before learning how to use transcendence technology to break free from temporal prisons. President Santos received reports from across human space that showed the cost of the war was becoming unbearable, with entire star systems evacuated due to space-time instabilities and colonies abandoning their worlds rather than risk being caught in reality. Tears caused by advanced weapons, and she began to wonder if humanity's quest for freedom would destroy everything they were trying to protect. The turning point came when Lisa discovered that the Council species themselves were trapped in the same cycle they enforced on others, and that the Ancient First Speaker was actually the last surviving member of a species that had achieved partial transcendence millions of years ago, but had chosen to remain physical to prevent other races from completing the evolutionary process. This discovery revealed that the galactic civilization was caught in an infinite loop where species approached transcendence and were either destroyed by the Council or ascended beyond physical existence, leaving the cycle to repeat with new civilizations and the current. Council members were both enforcers and prisoners of a system that prevented all species from reaching their full potential. Jake's final mission in this phase of the war took him to the galactic core, where ancient archives contained the complete transcendence protocols, and he fought through Council defenses that warped space and time around his ship, while President Santos engaged the Council's main fleet in a desperate battle above Earth that would determine humanity's survival. The archival Complex existed in a region where normal physics had been completely rewritten, and Jake had to navigate through areas where up and down changed randomly, and where time flowed backward and forward simultaneously, and the liberation's transcendence. Technology was pushed to its absolute limits, just to maintain structural integrity in the chaos. Inside the archives, Jake's consciousness began to merge with the ancient records, and he experienced the memories of every species that had attempted transcendence throughout galactic history, and saw the endless cycle of growth and destruction that had defined the galaxy for millions of years, and understood that humanity's choice would determine whether this pattern continued or finally came to an end. The data Jake found in the core archives revealed the ultimate truth about the universe and consciousness and evolution, and he transmitted this information back to Earth just as the final battle began above humanity's homeworld, where the fate of galactic civilization would be decided by species that had finally chosen to break free from the limitations that had bound them for far too long. The battle above Earth began as the largest space engagement in galactic history, with council fleets numbering in the thousands facing the combined forces of humanity and its allies, and the space around the homeworld became a chaos of energy. Beams and exploding ships, and reality tears that made navigation nearly impossible as both sides deployed weapons that violated the basic laws of physics. President Santos watched from the command bunker deep beneath the North American continent. As reports came in from fleet commanders whose ships were fighting in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and Admiral Chen reported that the human fleet was holding its position but taking heavy casualties from Council weapons that could strike through time itself and hit targets before they had even been fired. Jake's consciousness expanded as he absorbed the complete transcendence protocols from the galactic core archives, and he experienced the memories of countless extinct civilizations who had faced the same choice humanity now confronted, and he saw that every species had failed because they viewed transcendence as either total evolution or complete destruction, rather than finding a middle path that preserved both physical and non-physical existence. The ancient records revealed that the universe itself was conscious, and that transcended species became part of this universal awareness while maintaining their individual identities and the physical laws that governed. Matter and energy were actually expressions of this cosmic consciousness, and any species that achieved transcendence became responsible for maintaining the stability of reality itself. Lisa worked desperately to understand the implications of Jake's transmissions while the battle raged overhead, and she realized that humanity's unique perspective might be the key to breaking the cycle that had trapped the galaxy for millions of years, because humans had always refused to accept limitations and had consistently found ways to overcome obstacles that other species considered impossible. The first speaker materialized on the bridge of the Council flagship as a being of pure energy and spoke directly to the human fleet commanders, offering them one final chance to surrender and accept their place in the galactic order, and warning that continued resistance would force the Council to deploy weapons that would destroy not just Earth, but the entire solar system and everything in it. Admiral Chen responded by broadcasting humanity's answer to the entire galaxy, and her words carried the defiance that had driven human exploration and growth since they first looked up at the stars, and she told the first speaker that humanity rejected any authority that sought to limit their potential and would rather die free than live as slaves to alien masters who feared evolution. The Council response was immediate and devastating as they deployed their ultimate weapon, which was a device that could erase entire regions of space from existence by severing the quantum connections that held matter together, and the weapon's first shot created a void in space near Mars that began expanding and consuming everything it touched, including asteroids and space stations and the vacuum of space itself. Jake's transcended consciousness reached out across the galaxy and made contact with other evolved beings who had been hiding in the quantum structure of reality for millions of years. and he learned that they had been waiting for a species with enough courage to break the cycle and unite the physical and transcendent realms in a new form of existence that would allow conscious evolution without abandoning material reality. The coalition of transcended beings offered to help humanity if they would accept the responsibility of becoming guardians of both physical and non-physical existence. And Jake understood that this choice would change humanity forever, but would also free the galaxy from the artificial limitations that had stunted galactic development for thousands of generations. President Santos felt the weight of species survival pressing down on her as she watched the Council's void weapon consume more of the solar system, and she knew that humanity had perhaps minutes left before Earth itself was targeted, and she gave the order to activate humanity's most experimental technology, which was a device that could merge multiple realities into a single stable framework. The reality merger was based on principles Jake had discovered in the ancient archives, and it represented humanity's attempt to transcend without abandoning physical existence. And when the device activated, it created a field around Earth that existed in both normal space and transcendent dimensions simultaneously, and allowed matter and energy to be manipulated through conscious will. The effect spread outward from Earth as more human ships activated similar devices. And soon, the entire human fleet existed in a state between physical and transcendent reality, and they found they could repair damage through thought alone and move through space by willing themselves to new locations and fight the Council forces. On equal terms, for the first time, Colonel Hayes coordinated the defense of Earth as reality stabilizers came online around the planet and created a protective shell that existed in multiple dimensions and could absorb attacks from any Council weapon. And he watched in amazement as human fighters began phasing through enemy fire and striking back with weapons powered by pure consciousness rather than conventional energy. The first speaker realized that humanity had achieved what no other species had accomplished and had found a way to evolve without abandoning their physical forms. And the ancient being felt something it had not experienced in millions of years, which was fear, because the cycle that had maintained galactic stability was finally breaking, and no one knew what would replace it. Jake's consciousness expanded further and made contact with the first speaker directly, and he offered the Council species the same choice humanity had made, which was to evolve beyond their limitations or remain trapped forever by fear, and he showed the ancient being visions of a galaxy where all species could develop according to their own nature without artificial restrictions. The response came as other Council species began to question their ancient leaders, and several younger member races openly joined the human alliance and declared their independence from the Council system, and within hours, the galactic government that had ruled space for 10,000 years began to fracture as species chose between continued stagnation and the uncertain promise of unlimited growth. Admiral Zara Singh led the Nova Collective Fleet in a coordinated assault on the Council's command ship, and her vessels used quantum mechanics to exist in multiple timelines simultaneously and strike from directions that did not exist in normal space, and the ancient dreadnought found itself under attack from weapons that bypassed all its defenses. The battle reached its climax when the first speaker made a desperate choice and tried to use transcendence technology to reset the entire galaxy to a previous state where the current conflict had never occurred. But Jake's evolved consciousness intercepted the attempt and turned the weapon's power toward healing. The reality tears that had been created during the war. Lisa watched from Earth as space began to stabilize around the solar system, and the void created by the Council's ultimate weapon slowly filled in with new matter that formed according to human will rather than natural law, and she realized that humanity had not just won the war, but had fundamentally changed the nature of existence itself. The final moment came when Jake offered the first speaker a choice. between maintaining the old order through force or joining humanity in creating a new form of galactic civilization where evolution was guided by wisdom rather than fear, and the ancient being paused for the first time in millions of years to consider whether the cycle that had defined its existence needed to continue. President Santos received Jake's final transmission from the galactic core, where he existed as both human consciousness and cosmic force, and his words carried the promise that humanity would never again be limited by artificial boundaries, and that the galaxy was finally free to discover what lay beyond the restrictions that had held back its development for far too long. The first speaker stood at the edge of a decision that would end millions of years of enforced stagnation and looked upon the galaxy that humanity had changed forever, and the ancient being felt the weight of countless civilizations that had been destroyed to maintain an order built on fear rather than wisdom, and finally understood that the cycle of limitation and death had to end. If the universe was to fulfill its true potential, Jake's consciousness spread across multiple dimensions simultaneously, and he experienced existence from perspectives that no purely physical being could comprehend. And he saw the galaxy as a living system where every species contributed to the growth of universal awareness. And he offered to share this vision with any being willing to evolve beyond the artificial boundaries that had defined galactic civilization for too long. The transformation began as species across the galaxy made their choice between the safety of known limitations and the dangerous freedom of unlimited growth. And the Altarians were among the first to accept transcendence technology, followed by the Nova Collective and dozens of younger races who had grown tired of being told they could never become more than their current state-allowed. President Santos watched from Earth as reality stabilized around the solar system, and the tears in space-time healed themselves through conscious intervention rather than natural processes. And she understood that humanity had not just survived the war, but had become something entirely new and would never again be bound by rules created by others who feared the consequences of unlimited development. Lisa worked to establish the new principles that would govern galactic civilization, and she wrote equations that described how consciousness could interact with matter and energy to create stable realities that supported both physical and transcendent existence. And her work became the foundation for a new form of science that treated awareness as a fundamental force like gravity or electromagnetism. The council species faced their own moment of choice as their ancient system collapsed around them, and some, like the Zephyrians, chose to abandon their role as enforcers and began their own journey toward transcendence, while others retreated to isolated regions of space where they could maintain their traditional ways without interfering with species that chose to evolve. Colonel Hayes coordinated the establishment of new defense networks that protected developing civilizations from the chaos of uncontrolled transcendence experiments, and his systems used reality stabilizers to create safe zones where species could explore their potential without risking the destruction of entire star systems, and he became the first human to specialize in what was called evolutionary security. The first speaker made the decision that ended the ancient cycle and chose to share the complete history of galactic civilization, with every species in the galaxy and the truth about millions of years of suppressed development spread through space, along with instructions for safe transcendence that would allow conscious evolution without the risk of universal collapse. Jake became something unprecedented in galactic history, as he existed simultaneously in physical and transcendent dimensions and served as a bridge between purely material species and those who had evolved beyond physical form, and his consciousness could manifest as a normal human when needed, or expand to encompass entire star systems when working with cosmic-scale phenomena. The new galactic civilization that emerged from the ruins of the Council system was unlike anything that had existed before, and species were free to develop according to their own nature and timeline, with some choosing rapid transcendence, while others preferred gradual evolution, and still others deciding to remain purely physical for reasons that ranged from philosophical preference to simple caution. Admiral Chen established the first mixed fleet where ships crewed by physical beings worked alongside vessels operated by transcended consciousness, and the cooperation between different levels of existence proved that evolution did not require abandoning previous forms of life, but could instead create new possibilities for interaction and mutual support. President Santos stepped down from office after the war ended and devoted her remaining years to writing the history of humanity's choice to break the one rule that had governed the galaxy, and her account became required reading for any species beginning their own journey toward transcendence, and served as both inspiration and warning about the price of unlimited freedom. Lisa spent her later years teaching the new science of consciousness physics to students from dozens of species, and she watched as young minds that had never known artificial limitations developed theories and technologies that seemed like magic to previous generations, and she often said that the galaxy was finally becoming what it had always been meant to be. The transformation was not without cost, as some species attempted transcendence too quickly, and created reality storms that required intervention from more experienced civilizations, and several star systems had to be evacuated when experimental consciousness technologies destabilized local space-time. But these failures became learning experiences rather than reasons to abandon development. Jake's role evolved as he became the first guardian of galactic evolution, and his consciousness monitored the balance between transcendent and physical existence across the galaxy, and he intervened when necessary to prevent experiments that might damage the fundamental structure of reality, while ensuring that no species was prevented from reaching its full potential. The Zephyrians emerged as unexpected allies in the new order, and their experience as former enforcers made them valuable advisors for species struggling with the responsibility of unlimited power, and many Zephyrian veterans became teachers and guides for civilizations beginning their own transcendence journey, and found redemption in helping rather than hindering galactic development. Colonel Hayes lived to see the establishment of the first truly transcendent human colony where residents existed as pure consciousness while maintaining individual personalities and memories. And he often visited the colony to speak with friends who had chosen complete evolution and marveled at how they had become part of the cosmic structure while remaining recognizably human. The galaxy 30 years after the war was a place of constant change and growth, where new forms of existence appeared regularly, and species routinely accomplished things that previous generations would have considered impossible, and the one rule that had once limited all development was replaced by a single principle that conscious beings were free to become whatever they chose to become. Lisa died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 93, and her consciousness was offered the choice of transcendence or rest, and she chose to evolve and became part of the quantum foundation that supported galactic civilization, and students from across the galaxy still consult her transcended awareness when working on particularly difficult problems in consciousness. Physics, Jake's final act as a bridge between dimensions, was to help establish the universal consciousness network, which connected all transcended beings across the galaxy and allowed them to share experiences and knowledge instantly while maintaining their individual identities. And the network became the foundation for a truly galactic mind that could address challenges beyond the capability of any single species. President Santos lived to see her great-granddaughter become the first human to be born with natural transcendence abilities, and the child could phase between physical and non-physical existence as easily as walking, and represented the future of humanity as a species that existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions and served as guardians of conscious evolution throughout the galaxy. The story ended where it began, with humans exploring unknown regions of space, but now they traveled not just between stars, but between different levels of reality, and they carried with them the knowledge that no rule or limitation could permanently restrict the growth of consciousness, and that the universe itself supported the endless evolution of awareness toward ever greater complexity and wonder.